King was in sort of like at the forefront of the Wexit movement. He was one of the main people who started pushing for it. Now, for those of you who don't know, Wexit is this idea after the last election back in 2019. And the idea was that we need a Western exit. So they wanted to take Alberta and part of BC and leave Canada and form their own country. Okay? Now, the reason why I say part of BC is because they realize having Alberta as its own country will be completely landlocked. So they want to strip at the top of British Columbia so that they can reach the ocean. Okay? So that was their plan. It pretty much went nowhere. If you listen to our podcast, yes, Viano just mentioned Albumbia. The end clip where Ezra sings Albumbia, 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 that is from a joke that he came up with when he used to run this magazine called the Western Standard. And in the Western Standard, they uh, argued for Western separation way before this current Wexit movement. And I will say Ezra is against Wexit now, and I'll get to that in a second. But the Albumbia thing was, again, Alberta, British Columbia shoved together Albumbia, and that was the national anthem, like joke national anthem that they came up. And so that's what ends each one of our shows. Now, at the time of the Wexit stuff, Pat King was mentioned on Rebel's show, but like they barely went into it. The only other thing that they mentioned Pat King was in relation to the Wet'suwet'en. So Pat King went and interviewed one of the hereditary chiefs and tried to connect them with funding from George Soros. And then Ezra used some of that information on his show to sort of also argue that the Wet'suwet'en are connected to George Soros' Tides Foundation. It's a bunch of bullshit. It is what it is. But when it came to the Wexit stuff, Ezra was against Pat King, or I wouldn't say against Pat King. His worry is that if you have a Western separatist party, that the votes in Alberta will be split between the Conservatives, the Separatist Party, and the Liberals, to the point where Liberals will get elected in Alberta and the Conservatives won't, and the Conservatives will lose power in our parliament. That's what he's worried about. And he has evidence for that concern because Ezra used to be a part of the Reform Party, which was another vote splitting party back when the Conservatives were the Progressive Conservatives, and the Reform and the Progressives split the Conservative vote until Stephen Harper unified them into the Conservative Party of Canada, which exists today. Okay? So that's the history of what's going on here. So Ezra is tepid about Western separatism because he's worried about vote splitting. Even though he like gives like nods towards it as being like, okay, maybe like if they can work, but it's probably going to vote split, so I'm against it. So we've been covering recently this weird split in Ezra trying to distance himself from what I describe as the more like kookier elements of the anti-vaccine, anti-COVID camp. So, or not anti-COVID, but the anti like masks, anti-lockdown, all those people. Okay, so they called out Dedulo, who is the person who's claiming she's the new Queen of Canada and was sending cease and desist letters to people and is just weird and out there. They also debunked this story where like the UN had trucks in Toronto, and the idea was like, no, they're just being manufactured in Toronto. They're going somewhere else. Where some anti-vaccine activists were like, they're sending the UN trucks on our streets, right? Then there was the fallout with Chris Sky, where David Menzies interviewed him and called out the fact that he was anti-Semitic. I will also note, they don't bring it up here, Pat King, also anti-Semitic, buys into white genocide stuff. There's a video online, you can watch it, where Pat King filmed it in his vehicle, talking about white genocide. So he's one of them, okay? That never gets brought up here. But they are distancing themselves from Pat King now. And that's weird. They weren't distancing themselves from this from these people before. This seems to be a new trend. And I don't know exactly what it means. The best guess that I have so far in talking with other people and trying to like work through it, I feel like this is because Ezra wants buy-in with certain politicians. And the only politicians that he has buy-in with right now are people like Derek Sloan, loosely I will say Maxime Bernier, Randy Hillier, what's her name? Something Helios, who I think is one of the MPPs in Ontario. And all these people are anti-mask, anti-vaccine, COVID denialist type people. But he wants to side with them, and the politicians are distancing themselves from these anti-Semitic weird people. Okay? So that's the tension that's being created here, and the reason why I think that they want to distance themselves. I don't know that for sure, but like that's the only thing that I can come up with that makes some sense. So I wanted to play this clip mainly in purposes of like showing how they're distancing themselves from these people, and in this sense, they're going to distance themselves from Pat King. But then I want to get into the irony of it, uh, and so we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Of like a lot of the criticisms I think they're going to level at Pat King here can equally apply to themselves. Is a spoiler version of it. So here it is. I might speed it up a bit once we get going, but I'll let the beginning part of this play normal.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Warning. Censorship.
Warning.
If there is a victory, because that was the big thing in the headline in Block Cap, victory, it's that Mr. King, and I'm happy for him. It looks like he got his ticket tossed. He didn't deserve a $1,200 ticket just
Nobody
for protesting. No, of course, nobody. So that's a victory. And that's it. All this other stuff, it's irrelevant. It was not argued. And, Sheila, this has really become a runaway train.
It doesn't mean that there is no evidence that Alberta Health has not isolated the coronavirus. It also doesn't mean that there is evidence that they...
I might have to skip it forward a bit. I think it does one of those like opens, maybe.
And that's
have an interest go
that, there was a weird cut
so it
there.
doesn't mean that there is evidence
Whatever,
that they isolated the coronavirus. It just means that that evidence, if it's out there or not out there, they didn't have to produce it because it's not relevant to the ticket in court that Pat King was fighting. And that's it. And that, I think, is salient to debunking the hysteria around all of this.
Okay. So they're going to get into it a bit here, but basically Pat King got a ticket because he was attending these rallies, breaking COVID restrictions, all that. So he was given a ticket for $1,200. He went to court, and eventually the court basically got rid of the ticket. I don't know all the details there, but the court got rid of the ticket. And Pat King is claiming, coming out of this court procedure, saying that in court, the government said that there was no evidence for COVID. So he's going around telling people that COVID is a hoax and the government admitted it during his trial. That's his claim, okay? And this is what Rebel is debunking. They're saying that Pat King is wrong about this.
But, well, Sheila, and on Pat King, you have far more knowledge about this individual than I do. So, please, why don't you set the table? This is, of course, all about information that isn't quite right about Pat King getting a major victory for Albertans in a court of law. And by the way, folks, when we deconstruct this, don't shoot the messenger. And don't accuse us of being psyops or controlled opposition. That's not the fact. Sheila has the facts because she's gone through the court transcripts. And what did you discover, Sheila?
No, so notice they are aware of their audience, that they have to frame right up front that we're not controlled opposition. We're not conducting a psyops. And I'm curious, I should see what the like to dislike ratio is here. That's not bad. We got 120. Like the dislikes are a little bit more prominent on here, but we got people here saying I strongly believe that Pat King is onto something. Let Pat King speak for himself. Pat King paved a road to accurately win this in court. They shut it so like all the comments are very Pat King friendly. So this is a common theme. They've been doing these pieces that are distancing themselves from these elements, and the comment sections are reacting. That's what controlled opposition would say. What? Like, how do you make that as a? I'm not controlled opposition. Believe me. Leave me.
Sure. And let me preface this by saying I don't have any skin in the game. I don't really know Pat King at all. But
Not true.
I do have an interest in making sure that the truth is out there. I think that's one of the things that Ezra always tells us: follow the facts where they go. And then
the reason why I say that's not true, just to follow it up, is there was events hosted right after the 2019 election that Rebel was involved with, attended, and I think they even put on a few of them. I don't know if Pat King was speaking at them, but he definitely attended. And the idea was, should we go forward with a Wexit movement? Is the Wexit movement okay? And Rebel was putting on these events back in 2019, where Pat King would have been around because he was one of the main. There started to become infighting even within the Wexit movement, but still, the point is they would have been definitely aware of who he was. And given that Sheila is in Alberta, she was probably present or at least integral in organizing and helping with all that shit.
we'll make our conclusions. But we can't throw out some facts or like go on have a conclusion and then just craft a story around it. That's not what we do here. So I think by now everybody has seen the Stu Peters, at least the headline of the Stu Peters Rumble chat that he had with Pat King, who is a Red Deer-based activist, an anti-lockdown activist. And before that, he was a pro-oil and gas activist. And again, I don't know Pat King from anybody, really. But Justin, would you mind bringing up the headline of that Rumble Stu Peters story, if you could? Because I forget the exact headline.
I do like this. Like, I can sympathize.
And I also want to preface this by saying I court report all the time. So I don't want to say, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than anybody, and I'm definitely not saying that lawyers are smarter than common people. Lawyers are just common people with an expertise in law. So let's get that out of the way right away. But
So, like, notice, I don't even know if Elrod's there right now, but, like, he would be crapping his pants knowing that they're really arguing for expertise here. Like, you would think...
Oh, I'm here. No, I'm good. I'm just keeping quiet. You don't need to hear me blowing up everywhere.
But it's like, what's amazing, and I will say, I don't know if the video is up right now, but earlier today, and I was thinking of showing that clip, but it's not up yet on the Rebel News site. Which is that every Friday they do like their daily show, which is like Ezra doing like a live stream, which is where the I'm young and I'm black and my hat's on backwards or whatever the hell he says. That clip came from one of the live streams. So they had a live stream today where Ezra himself like went through this stuff, and it was funny because in the first half when he's addressing the Pat King stuff, he's talking about expertise and how expertise in the law matters, and you need to get yourself a real lawyer, unlike Pat King's sovereign citizen did. And I don't think they get to it in this video, but if you read the transcript of what Pat King said, it was like the first questions he asked the court where it's like, is this a sovereign court in the nation of Canada? And like these weird sovereign nation stuff, or sovereign citizen stuff. If you don't know about the sovereign citizen movement, there are these people who are like weird libertarians that believe like law is just magical words, and that you're like not really a citizen of the state, you're a citizen of the world. And there's like these weird that you can go into the courts and say magical court words and everything will work out in your favor. And their argument against the sovereign citizen shit is to go, look, having a real lawyer matters. The law is real. You need to have an expert. You can't go in there alone and just do this shit. You're not going to succeed. It's important to have a lawyer. And so Ezra did that on the live stream today. And then right after that segment was putting doubt on the vaccines in Canada and using himself as the expert to go, well, this, I don't know about this. That sounds like a bad side effect. And like reading data incorrect on his fucking show. And it's and it's just like, for the reason like that doesn't click in his audience mind, where it's like, and it's funny because the audience is turning against this. The audience is going, how dare you tell Pat King to have an expert lawyer to work with? They've trained their audience to hate expertise. Rebel has press credentials to be in the Alberta legislature. It breaks my brain. Yeah. They're probably going to be able to ask questions again to the during the leadership debates at the next election. So.
do court reports, so I have some familiarity with legal jargon that the regular layperson might not have. You don't need it. You're not court reporting, right? Like no disrespect intended. But so I want to first point out the timeline of all of this here. Because it says freedom fighter court victory ends masking, shots, and quarantine in Alberta. Now, if you know, the masking and basically the end of our lockdown was July 1st. That was the end of our lockdown.
Yeah.
This court case transpired roughly on July 19th. So that Stu Peters would attribute credit to Pat King, I don't think is accurate or fair. And Pat King's court case didn't do any of that. But I actually took the time to read the transcript of what went down in court that day. And I also read the originating documents from Alberta Health Services about what went down. Now, in that video, Pat King says that AHS has no material evidence that COVID-19 exists. It says the chief medical officer has no material evidence. And
no, I gotta fix my camera here, but no material evidence. So it says here the CMOH has no material evidence. Mr. King has no evidence showing that the evidence sought from the CMOH is likely to be material to the provincial court proceedings. So Pat King is using this saying no evidence showing to suggest that this proves that like COVID is not real. But all they're saying, so Pat King petitioned to have like other people present. So he wanted to petition like the leader of Alberta's health and stuff like this, and petition them so that to force them to come to court. And what this is saying is that there's no like reason to bring those people involved because there's no material evidence connecting them to the case. That's all this is saying. And it should be squashed on this basis, right? So him asking these people to appear in the court, there's no reason to have them show up. And he's using this as to say that the court is saying that COVID's not real. And that's not at all what is happening. And Sheila explains that a bit.
And so in the video, he presents this as, and I don't know if this is intentional or otherwise, that means that there is no evidence that COVID-19 exists. Now, that's not the case. Yeah. It may be the case, it may not be the case, but that's not what that statement means. Material in legal jargon means relevant evidence. Yeah. And then those proceedings or the court filings go on to explain exactly what that means. So Justin, could you bring up, I sent you a document earlier about the AHS, their response. Okay, so I went through this with a fine tooth comb so that you could.
So I want to pause there too. So I don't know, Vienna, if you're in chat right now, or even Elron, anytime that we've had them address legal documents on this fucking show, have they ever been this thorough with a legal document? They've like never.
No, absolutely fucking not. Never. They'll always like, what is it they do? They like highlight a section that they think agrees with them and ignore the rest of it that's showing that it doesn't constantly.
Now, I have a particular example that I'm going to do, and it's not because it's like a how do I put this? Like the best example of this. It's just that it's the most recent. So this is July 27th. But it happened this past week on the show. Like eventually Vienna and I are going to be recording this and talking about it. But the fact is here, so here's the case where, again, they get the whole court document incorrect. And that's interesting to me because it's like right now they're going with a fine-tooth comb on this Pat King stuff. But here's how they normally get shit wrong legally. So here, all that's important is you got Arthur Pasteur here, who was one of the pastors who defied COVID restrictions. He was a court injunction then went through, and rather than obey the court injunction to stop holding these mass gatherings, they charged him with contempt of court. So then when it came to sentencing, so they put it here, they want to send him back to prison for 21 more days. Really, this is just the process of sentencing. So they're going, we looked at your thing, now we're going to give you jail time, we're going to give you 21 days. And they make it sound like they're sending him back for 21 more days, okay? And they say that this is all because he refuses to admit he's wrong. And in fact, they say, so there's no more lockdowns, opening his church is no longer illegal. And then they go, but because he won't apologize for doing so earlier, he is being prosecuted for contempt. And the government is demanding he serve 21 days of hard time. Now I want to say 21 days of hard time is a weird phrasing. 21 days is not even a month. Is that hard time? Probably uncomfortable time.
3 weeks of hard time.
But then you go, okay, so is it because he won't apologize? And the thing is, like, there's like shades of truth in this. So when you read the actual legal document, which again, they always provide it, and this is why it's like so easy to debunk the shit, because all I have to do is read the document that they provide on their website. Everyone knows you only serve 2 days, the day you get in and the day you get out. And then you can look at like their explanation and what it says. Yeah, so it says here that okay, despite the injunction order, so he receives the injunction, and despite it, he breaks the law. So it goes, despite the injunction order, the respondent, knowing full well that their actions were in breach of an order of the court, persisted in organizing and attending a large in-person public gathering on May 8th, 2021. Prior to and during the May 8th gathering, the respondent referred to and openly repudiated the injunction order. So he willingly knew he was breaking the law. On June 28th, 2021, this court found the respondent in contempt of court in connection with their breach of the injunction order. To this day, the respondents have failed to offer any admission of guilt or apology for their breach of the injunction order. On the contrary, in the case of Artur Pawlowski, he has continued to publicly attack the injunction order's legitimacy and has openly called into question the appropriateness of the court's findings of contempt against him. Right? So notice how like the apology is just like there's no admission of guilt or an apology. Okay? In view of the foregoing, AHS requests that the following sanctions be rendered against the respondent: 21 days of imprisonment, okay? As will be set forth, the requested sanction is proportional with the scope and nature of the respondent's contempt and is commensurate with the need for this court to appropriately deter and denounce the respondent specifically, as well as the public at large from engaging in similar actions in the future. So what they're saying here is, given that he refuses to apologize, given that he refuses to admit he was wrong, he is still a danger to the public by telling them that they should break COVID restrictions in the future, even if there are no ongoing COVID restrictions. And so therefore, the government goes, because he's not admitting to guilt, because he's still saying that he wasn't guilty, we have to put him in jail, because that's the only way to signal to the public that there's going to be penalties for acting against what the court asks. Okay? Now again, put that in the framing of how they describe this. They want to send him back to prison for 20 more days, all because he refuses to admit he was wrong. There is no more lockdown, opening his church is no longer illegal, but because he won't apologize for doing so earlier, he's being prosecuted for contempt, and the government is demanding he serve 21 days of hard time. So it's like they do this shit constantly where they take things out of context. I will also say, the funny thing about this story is on the podcast, Ezra claims that in this document as well, they connect him to eco-terrorists or compare him to an eco-terrorist. And when you read the document, like, again, the only way you can say that the court was comparing him to eco-terrorists is if you don't understand how legal documents are formed, which is that you need to cite precedent of why we're allowed to get away with giving him the sentence that we're giving him. And part of the reason was they were like, look, here are some cases where people were put in jail for contempt of court and the reasons that were provided in those cases. So therefore, we have precedent in doing the same to Artur Pawlowski. And because a couple of those cases were cases that involved eco-terrorists that blew up pipelines and other stuff, that's why Ezra is saying they're comparing him to eco-terrorists, which is not at all what they're doing. They're comparing contempt of court cases across a myriad of cases. But it's like weird. They're going to go through this with a fine teeth comb for Pat King But when it comes to their own like stories, they're still doing the same shit that even Pat King is doing here, which is like lying about what exists in the fucking law. Free the eco-terrorists. Yeah, no, I had stuff in when we do the show for the podcast, I definitely had more at least in the sense, like, my argument, I should point out as well, if you compare eco-terrorists with Arthur Pawlowski, if you actually want to make that comparison, I would say that in some sense, Arthur is probably more responsible for more deaths than eco-terrorists are by helping to spread the disease and telling other people to spread disease. And this disease has killed tons of people. So by being a promoter of spreading disease, he has probably been more has more of an impact on death in the world than an eco-terrorist has blowing up a pipeline, in my opinion. But let's go through this with a fine tooth comb.
Let's go to number 8, because the first part is all just sort of setting the scene. So number 8, and I'm going to read this off my phone. It says the chief medical officer has no material evidence. That doesn't mean that there's no evidence. It means material or relevant evidence to this case. Number 8 is important. Mr. King has no evidence showing that the evidence sought from the chief medical officer is likely to be material. So let's just cross out material and say relevant to the provincial court proceedings, contrary to, and then it gives a section of the code regarding his ticket. So what that means is the chief medical officer has no information about his specific ticket. And as such, the justice of the peace did not have jurisdiction to issue the subpoena, and it should be squashed on this basis. So this is a jurisdictional issue. So, let's go into number 9. Mr. King explained the reason for the subpoena in the document he attached as Schedule A to the subpoena. It is clear that Mr. King seeks evidence relating to the rationale for orders issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health under the Act. He seeks evidence about crafting the statute. So he wanted the Chief Medical Officer of Health to produce evidence of isolation of the coronavirus. And I don't really know what he means by that, but that's what he asked for. And then if we move on to number 10, this is I guess really the most important part. He's asking for these things that are not relevant to his ticket. And there's a reason they aren't relevant to his ticket, and it goes to procedure and charter issues that he failed to raise sooner. So let's go into section 10. The provincial court proceeding is about the December 5th, 2020 enforcement of the law when Mr. King was issued the...
So I mean, we're getting the gist of it, but notice, like, she's doing what I just did to debunk an article on Rebel News. But doing it to debunk Pat King. And think about, like, what's going on there.
Funny that.
They have the skill set. They can do what I do. And yet, they don't do it to themselves with their other fucking court cases that they constantly refer to. Constantly. Yes, funny that. How often throughout this pandemic have we heard Ezra Levant on the fucking show say that these restrictions are against the Constitution, they're not legal, they're all going to be thrown out, that's why you need to donate to our Fight the Fines thing, and we can fight these things in court. And what they're finding is all of these things are failing in the courts. You can't fight these fines, you're not going to succeed. King succeeded on a technicality, but they know this, and yet they're still asking for the audience to donate to the Fight the Fines initiative. And what they're banking on is that a lot of these tickets, like Pat King's, are going to get thrown out on technicalities. Only 100 of the tickets that they processed through the Fight the Fines initiative, and I think they're up to 2,000 cases now, at least that's what they've said on their show, only 100 of those have, like, succeeded in their eyes, and they're all tickets that are low-level fines that have been thrown out due to procedural reasons. And yet, do you see them doing a turn, being like, we were mistaken, these are all going to fail their lawsuits, we're losing in the courts, therefore stop donating to us? No. They keep continuing to tell people to donate, even though if you read the law like you're going through this with a fine-tooth comb, you're fucking wrong. They're fucking wrong. And I still have Chris Sky proponents that watched my Chris Sky predictions video and were like, Chris Sky's still right. All these cases are going to get thrown out. No, they're not.
Ticket, not the rationale for the law. So they're saying this is about the ticket. You can't ask about these other things, and because you can't ask about those other things because it's not relevant to your ticket, we're not going to produce it because it's not material to the case or relevant to the case. The Chief Medical Officer of Health does not have, and Mr. King does not seek from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, so he didn't ask for it, any evidence about the ticket issued to Mr. King on December 5th, 2020. So instead of asking the Chief Medical Officer of Health for information relating directly to his ticket that he could use in court to fight his ticket, he asked for all this other stuff that's not relevant And they're like, well, why didn't you ask for stuff relevant to your ticket? Because if we had it, we would produce it, but you didn't ask, so we're not producing all this other stuff because it's not relevant. And here's the reason it's not relevant. Further, there can be no constitutional challenge to the Act or orders issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health under the Act in the absence of proper notice to the Attorney General of Canada and the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General of Alberta under the Judicature Act. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. And Mr. King has not given any notice in the provincial court proceedings. So what they're saying there, and I read through the transcripts to find when this happened, Pat King tried to raise a constitutional issue, and the judge said, you can't do that now. You should have done that sooner, because you had to do that sooner to give notice to the court. So you can't ask for these things that you would use to argue against your ticket on a constitutional.
This is why I will say, I mean, if you listen to any like legal podcast, never represent yourself. I mean, especially if you're non-lawyer. Pat King didn't know what the fuck he was doing. Do not be like Pat King, okay? Get yourself a lawyer if you're going to court. That's my one piece of advice going forward.
Basis, all this like grand information about the virus from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, because you didn't raise that issue soon enough, so they don't have to produce it. And so we are just dealing with the ticket, the circumstances of how the ticket came to be. That's what happened there. I hope everybody understands it. I know there's a lot of legal jargon there, but I tried to break it down. It doesn't mean that there is no evidence that Alberta Health has not isolated the coronavirus. It also doesn't mean that there is evidence that they isolated the coronavirus. It just means that that evidence, if it's out there or not out there, they didn't have to produce it because it's not relevant to the ticket in court that Pat King was fighting. And that's it. And that, I think, is salient to debunking the hysteria around all of this.
I'm constantly just in awe of watching this clip, in part because if they were like this nonstop, I would have no problem with these people, which tells me that like they have the skill set to actually put in some work to break down why something is wrong and criticize it. They have that skill set and yet refuse to apply it to any other situation. Any other situation. They're just being annoying libs right now. Why are they annoying libs right now? It's more of just like, yeah, you can break down these legal cases and point out why the one argument argued by the other. Well, I mean, the both sides aspect of this, though, it has more to do with, like, they're technically correct in that the court is not ruling this thing. They're just saying this thing, right? And Pat King is saying this, like, way out here wacky thing. So it's not both sidesism. It's just like, what is the court actually saying? Which is something that I think is important, that a lot of people, when reading like legal documents, like actually do mess up. And it's just like, it's just frustrating. Because it tells me like they have everything else that they argue, everything else that they say, all that shit. They have the ability to investigate it and do all this work if they wanted to, but they don't do it because they don't care about it. When it comes to them, they don't care about it. And for some reason, either because Pat King was getting on their grift by coming out on the show and saying that, look, I'm the one who stopped the lockdowns by like exposing the government and saying that the pandemic is over. And they don't like that Pat King is getting on their grift and that's why they're fighting it. Or if it's because the politicians are telling them to stop associating with these other, like, more wacky people. That's the only reason they're doing it. And it's weird.
Not only was Alberta open 3 weeks prior to this court case, but what this court case did and what transpired in the court case is not what's being presented in the media. And I don't have any skin in the game, except for the fact I want everybody out there to know, please do not try this yourself. Because if Pat King had a lawyer, he could have raised those constitutional issues sooner, when appropriate. And maybe he could have got access to this information, but he didn't have a lawyer. He was trying to navigate this himself. And you know what? He got the tickets thrown out. And I don't think he got them thrown out for any other reason than the court is like, this has gone on too long. This is a waste of the court's time. Goodbye. I think that's what happened there. But the moral of the story is, you need a lawyer sometimes to navigate these tough legal issues. Pat King got as far as he could on his own. I think the Crown and the court just got fed up with him, frankly, and tossed his ticket. And you know what? Great. I'm glad he doesn't have to pay it. But what you are seeing on the internet is not what these documents say, both in the transcripts and in the filings by Alberta justice lawyers. It's just not, the two things are not existing in the same reality.
No, well said, Sheila. And I think you're right. I mean, two things. One is because there are so many procedural matters and because, as you said, there's so much legal jargon, this is truly a cautionary tale when it comes to what our boss likes to refer to as homemade lawyering. Don't do it, folks, especially for something incredibly complicated like this. This is not fighting a speeding ticket, right? And it just shows you what can happen when you think you know how to proceed with a case, and yet, as Sheila mentioned, all the procedural matters, all the legal jargon, you're destined for failure. Secondly,
how many court cases have they lost so far during this pandemic or throughout their careers? They constantly lose court cases. And here's, oh man, I phrased it very poorly for David Menzies here. And how many times they file these things, they lose it. It's like amazing that they have this position. I want to say, speaking of this, one thing that they have not covered on their show, it has become like news that they haven't even decided to touch. It's almost a month old now, I think, the news. And I think it's very important that they should bring it up, but haven't. And it's this piece right here. Justice Center head John Carpe steps down after hiring PI firm to surveil a Manitoba judge. Okay? John Carpe, who's the head of the was the head of the Justice Center of Constitutional Freedom, which is where like Lindsay Shepherd works, I think. He used to go on Ezra's show all the time. And then he just went away. He was like one of the main people helping to fight all these COVID cases. He's been helping them with fighting. There's this, a lot of the anti-trans stuff. Like there was a father that was leaking their trans child's medical information to the public, even though there was a publication ban in place. He was defending that father. He's been working with the rebel forever. And now they just don't talk about him anymore. And that is because, I will just sum it up rather than reading the article. You can go read the article yourself. What he did, he was helping to defend another COVID case. And I wonder if it was a part of the Fight the Fines initiative, actually, with Rebel News. Actually, let's see if we get, I'll control F it. Rebel, no. Yeah, it's not coming up. So I wonder if it was associated with the Fight the Fines initiative. But Carpe was defending someone who was fined for violating COVID restrictions. And what he did was hire a private investigator to follow this judge and document if they ever violate the COVID restrictions. And that was going to play like what? A gotcha in court? People are like, Judge, how can you say my client is guilty when you appeared on March 4th not wearing a mask at the beach and we have the video evidence to prove it? Like, what the fuck did he think he could do?
Brilliant. Just fucking brilliant.
And
fucking amazing.
He was Ezra's go-to lawyer on fucking everything. And he didn't know enough to go, hey, maybe stalking the judge or who's going to rule on one of my client's cases. Maybe that's not a great idea. So I don't think we'll be hearing about him for a while. I wonder if he's ever coming back. But this is the legal expertise that they constantly went to. So it's amazing hearing them being like, what you need is a real solid lawyer who knows what they're doing. Oh my God, John Carpe.
As we said right off the hopper, this case did not end. The masking rules, the shots, the quarantine, that had already occurred. If there is a victory, because that was the big thing in the headline in Block Cap, victory, it's that Mr. King, and I'm happy for him. It looks like he got his ticket tossed. He didn't deserve a $1,200 ticket just
Nobody
for protesting. No, of course, nobody. So that's a victory. And that's it. All this other stuff, it's irrelevant. It was not argued. And, Sheila, this has really become a runaway train. And I'm not saying this with any glee. I think the reason why we're getting literally dozens of emails every day saying, what about the Pat King story? Why aren't you covering the Pat King story? I think it's because people in a hopeless situation are looking for any scintilla of hope, just like the thousands of people that now believe we have a new Queen of Canada, Queen Ramona. I mean, it's laughable, but it's heartbreaking too, because people are at their wits' end with these lockdowns and restrictions and everything else. But as the saying goes, if something looks too good to be true, you know how that plays out, Sheila.
Like, what about their Fight the Fines initiative? Like it's almost amazing because they're admitting, like, if something seems too good to be true, they're putting out this like stick, being like, "Hey, we can help you fight these fines." Like, let me pull this shit up here.
Yeah, and
Got the Fight the Fines initiative right here. Free lawyer for lockdown fines. Every single day, we're hearing stories of law-abiding citizens, families really, who are being ticketed and fined by overzealous police and bylaw officers for simply doing what the Prime Minister is doing. We're talking about people who are being fined for ordinary... Anyways, they're being fined. They've taken over 2,000 tickets. If you received an outrageous ticket, fill out the form and tell us about it. You can also help us defend those who have been given tickets by donating to Rebel and get a Canadian deducted receipt. So go. They're like, we encourage you, join our fight. Fund us, and we'll help fight these things for you. Don't buy into all the other people who are selling you a grift. Buy into our grift. Our grift is the important grift. Queen Dedula, she's weird. Pat King, he's wrong. We'll go through the legal documents. But when it comes to our grift, we're not even going to analyze that at all. In fact, we're still going to use the image of a police officer that the Conservative Party of Canada is suing them for, or Progressive Conservatives. So weird.
I'm of two minds of this. I mean, it's pretty clear that we've got non-lawyers dealing with complex legal issues here, so misunderstandings happen. So I'm trying to not read into this that this is some sort of sinister misrepresentation of what's happening. That being said, if this is a misunderstanding of what happened, it's time for a public correction from everybody involved.
Yep.
Because in the interest of accuracy and integrity, I think everybody involved, from Stu Peters on down, Pat King, you too, let's set the record straight. What is being presented in the media and online is misleading thousands of people. And if people would just take the time to read the court transcripts and to understand what the word material means in the course of a legal proceeding, it is not the way that everybody's representing this. And if it is a misunderstanding, let's clear the air and fix this, because...
Sheila Gunn-Reid, I have over a year's worth of podcast episodes that have pointed out the myriad examples in which you and Ezra and Menzies have all been wrong. So in the spirit of you talking about Pat King and their followers, I expect an apology. I want to hear you admit for every single moment in our podcast where I've called you out on your bullshit, I want an apology. Laying it out there.
You know that's not happening. You know you're never getting that apology. We're all forced to suffer forever. That's the way this works.
Also, I forgot to mention too this with David Menzies when he mentioned the scintilla. People are looking for a scintilla of hope, and I'm just like, but why? Like, if you just tell them that the vaccines work, that's a way of giving them hope. But instead, you're continuing to claim that this thing isn't real and the vaccines don't work. Or I wouldn't say that the thing isn't real. They obviously believe COVID exists. Although, again, I wish that this part is... I don't know if they're going to post it later or they've just deleted the video. But in the daily stream today, Ezra was constantly fighting with his chat because his chat was telling him that COVID is not real. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. COVID is real. Now, if you want to talk about the vaccines, we could talk about the vaccines. But COVID, it's real. It's a real virus. And everyone in the chat is like, it's not real. It's a hoax. And that's the audience that you guys, you cultivated that audience. And now you have to lay with it. Your little debunking of Pat King here is not sufficient.
You know, I think the longer this goes on, the longer my mind sways towards the fact that this is purposeful misleading. So let's fix it right now, guys.
You know what, Sheila? If I do say so myself, I think a fantastic story idea for you would be for you and Mr. King to have a one-on-one interview and get to the bottom of this.
No, I don't want that at all. But I will say, you know, the longer Rebel continues to produce content, that's evidence to me that this is purposeful. They're purposefully lying. The more this goes on, it just tells me that it can't be a mistake at this point, you know? I think the only apology I remember coming from Ezra was about Faith Goldie, and that was it. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, you good.
I think that would be a must-watch video.
You know, I tried to send him a Facebook message this morning and I wasn't able to. If somebody has contact information for Pat King, or if he has an email address, I would love to send him my questions, because I have an entire email that I typed out. Took me an hour because I was going back and forth between court documents so that I got everything right, versus and watching the video so that I could meticulously go through what was represented in the video versus what I was reading in the court documents. I have an email typed out. I just don't have an email address to send it to. I cut and pasted. I was going to send it in Facebook. Can't do that. So I would love to send a written email to Pat King so that he can answer these questions for me. If this is all an accident, if this is all inadvertent because we've got lay people trying to navigate the legal system, I get it. I want to put that on the record too. If this is like, yeah, I didn't really know what the word material meant. Okay, great. I'm happy. I didn't really know it either until I started court reporting. And you get a crash course in legal jargon really fast. So I understand that could be inadvertent, but the longer this goes on, we got a problem now.
Well, Sheila, I do believe I have a contact that will have Mr. King's number for you, so I'll get.
See, they have a contact. Clearly, they know people who know Pat King, and Pat King exists in their.
On that right after the live stream for you.
There you have it.
Oh, hi.
It's just I don't even know. I'm at a loss for words. I was in the kitchen and did not know it was the same lady from earlier. It's amazing that she is capable of reasoned analytical thought compared to earlier, right? Which tells me, if you can do it here, why are you not doing it elsewhere? And like, I know what the answer is. The answer is because those other cases don't fit your ideological predispositions. So you're not going to give it the same amount of analytical rigor. Because you're ideologues, you're propagandists. I mean, that's the obvious answer there, but it's it's just amazing that this is happening. That we've watched them now do several pieces where they debunk and they deconstruct some things. And it's you could be applying that to other things. And how is this not obvious to your audience? I mean, in some ways it is obvious to their audience, because a lot of their audience is not buying it. They're going, no, you're controlled opposition. You're lying. The COVID really doesn't exist. And why are you being mean to Queen Dudula? Why are you being mean to Pat King? Why are you being mean to Chris Guy? These are our heroes and you're being mean to them. You cultivated this audience, Rebel. Congratulations.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.